And we're good. Okay, welcome back. A reminder again, we are not having class next week. Next Wednesday night, there's no class. The rabbi gets a day off with his family during spring break.
Oh, okay.
So we will continue today from Yoma, chapter 3, Mishnah 7. We are still talking about the ceremony of the day of Yom Kippur. And then hopefully we'll finish chapter 3. I don't see any reason why we won't. And then we'll get into chapter 4 as well. Everybody good? We know the game plan? Okay. So we are on chapter 3, Mishnah 7. So make sure that your page says Yoma, chapter 3, Mishnah 7 at the top of the page. In whichever language you prefer. All right, and can I impose upon our narrator?
Thank you.
You're welcome. 1. In the morning, he would wear Perusian linen worth 12 minas, or 1,200 dinar or zuz. At dusk, Indian linen worth 800 zuz, the words of Rabbi Meir.
All right, so
How expensive?
how expensive the garments were, and that is a lot of money, right? So for a set of clothes, that's a lot of money.
So Perusian is for Persian and India for India.
It's debated in different things. The commentary I have is that Pelusium was a city in Egypt, so it was the Egyptian linen, and then the Indian linen is from India, the second place.
How much would that be nowadays?
Well, if we go by the equivalency here of 200 dinar or zuzim, you can imagine that a ketubah might run you between 200 and 400 zuz, which was supposed to be enough for a woman to live on for a substantial period of time. So you're probably looking here at 5, 6, 7, 8 years salary for the garment. Yeah.
Amazing.
Not that people have big salaries, but yeah, it's pricey. Very, very pricey.
Different garments in the morning and different ones for evening wear.
Right. So think your Savile Row custom-made suit, which could cost you in multiple thousands nowadays. That's what he's wearing.
But is the only that he used this, or they use the same one every year?
Could it be reworn other times? Yes, but that's how much it was worth. But we are going to see an option that comes at the end of the Mishnah. But the idea is that this was the Yom Kippur garb. Now, I mean, it's ironic because linen is supposed to be cheap. I mean, not cheap, but linen is not like as expensive as some other types of cloths. So, and remember, the linen that he's wearing here is very simple linen. This is not supposed to be complicated linen. But it was of such fine quality that it was expensive. It was imported.
No, what is more ironic is that Yom Kippur should be more humble. Ladies don't use cosmetic makeup. Everyone be humble and the way that you clothe. And they decided to wear the Supreme Kohen Gadol with the most expensive,
right,
showing off all the.
Is it because you're going up in presence of Hashem?
Okay. So we actually talked about this a little bit at lunchtime with the idea of the korbanot as the I know
That's no fair. She had an introduction.
So there's a wonderful commentary by Shadal, and other commentaries agree that in order to have the people have respect, there needed to be a certain level of grandeur that was taking place during the ritual. That doesn't mean that it was for God. It doesn't mean that it was for the Kohen Gadol. But if the people saw him show up in a t-shirt and jeans, it would reduce their awe for the day. And so there is some truth to be said that he had to dress the part, that he had to dress in a way that was impressive. Now, is there a balance? We're going to see that in the rest of this Mishnah.
So the institution doesn't have enough weight, that he really need to have a special clothes because they don't respect him.
So if I tried to daven in t-shirt and jeans for a Shabbat morning or for a Rosh Hashanah,
Still you are rabbi.
Still I am rabbi. But do you really think that 100% of the people would experience the service as well if that's how I was dressed and if that's how everybody was dressed? Right? Why do people always wear whatever their best is. I mean, their best may be just a shirt rather than a shirt and tie or a tie and suit, but everybody always dresses better for the high holidays than they do for a regular day, even a regular Shabbat or Chag. And they do so not to show off. Some may do, yes, but they do it because they know that dressing differently puts you in a different frame of mind, and being in a group of people that are dressed differently and watching a ceremony that is conducted like the Kohen Gadol by somebody who is dressed differently, it does focus you in a certain way. We are creatures, we are animals, and we do respond to the sights, the sounds, the smells, the feel of everything around us, not just our mind and our spirit. And that is not always a bad thing. It can be a problem, but in and of itself, it's not a bad thing. Again, I recommend, even if you don't listen to the whole podcast, if you download the handout from the YouTube link, you can see the commentary by Shadal, which does a really good job of explaining that. If you can't find it on YouTube, email me and I'll send you the copy directly.
Handout from the parasha.
Yeah, for Vayikra for today. Oh, you know what?
Oh, yes.
Isn't she such a good
There
student?
it is.
There you go. We have extras. It might reach you. Okay. Onward. Part 2.
The sages say, in the morning, he would wear garments worth 18 minas, and at dusk, garments worth 12 minas, altogether 30 minas.
Right. So the sages say even more expensive than what Rabbi Meir said. Right? They up the ante. However,
these costs were at the charge of the community, and if he wanted to add, he adds more out of his own pocket.
Okay. So the community agrees that this is a level of grandeur that is needed to maintain the dignity of the ceremony of Yom Kippur. If the Kohen Gadol thinks that it needs to be even better than that, he's paying for the difference out of his own pocket.
Question.
Yes.
So what happened during the time of the eras of poverty, when Jerusalem was very poor? That still we have the Kohen Gadol, but many people couldn't afford so much. So what happened on that era? Because
if they couldn't afford,
right?
If they couldn't afford, they couldn't afford. Remember, we're talking about when the days in the temple stood, which meant that there was a kingdom. It wasn't when we were subjugated, so much so that we had no financial support.
Or when we came back from Babel.
Right, and we rebuilt the temple. That took money too.
Correct.
Right. I mean, so there was money, and the money would have been prioritized to make sure that this was appropriate. It doesn't mean people were starving in order to pay for his clothes, but it does mean that they would have been prioritizing that before they were building, the fancy gates of the city or other expenses that were less essential.
So they used the shekel from the whole Jewish world.
Well, certainly, yes. Because this was on behalf of the entire Jewish world. Yes. Now, whether or not everybody paid their fair share, that's a question. The morning was the primary part of the service, but he does have to change in the middle of the day, and so the secondary part of the day is slightly reduced, but still considered very, very grand.
Is it proportional to the price, the importance?
Not directly. I mean, there's not like an actual percentage of level of importance. They never go into that level of, sort of ratios of importance. But it is because the first part of the day is the more important part of the day. Make sense? All right. And we could imagine this in, an application in the modern world where the congregation might give the rabbi or the cantor a certain expense account to, purchase their kittel for Yom Kippur, and they say, here's what you can spend on your kittel. And if the rabbi says, well, I really like that kittel, even though it's $500 more, the congregation can say, great, you pay the extra $500.
Did they always have to have a new garment every single time, or did they keep the garment and then? I'm curious about.
Theoretically, it could be kept. Given the duties that he's got, chances are it was probably replaced because you're
dusting and all the.
Or the slaughtering.
Yeah, the slaughter, yeah.
Yeah, if you do it right, you shouldn't get splattered, but you're probably still going to get drops, and white linen is not the easiest thing to get blood stains out of.
That's right.
Yeah. All right, onward.
Oh, we're on Mishnah 8 now?
Mishnah 8.
He came to his bull, and his bull was standing between the ulam and the altar, its head to the south and it's faced to the west.
All right, so the Ulam was the outermost part of the Beit HaMikdash, the actual building of the temple, not the courtyard around it, but the actual temple building. So he stood between that and towards the altar. So it was in between the temple and the altar. So that people have a mental picture of that, right? The temple was roughly sort of like a inverted T shape, and then you have the altar over here. So he's standing with the cow there.
Would that be outdoors?
Yes, where he's standing would be outdoors. Yes, there's sort of a portico at the beginning here, but he's standing between it. I love the word portico. It's a great word.
To the south.
Yes.
It's faced
Sorry.
to the west.
All right, so let me give you a quick compass. All right, that's north, that's south, that's east, and that's west. Got it?
That works.
Go to the south, and what is to the west.
Yes.
His face towards
So
like that.
the bull is going this way, right? But its head is twisted, so those are his horns. That it's facing to the west,
Yeah, that's right.
right? So he's like this and like that.
Oh.
Yeah, well, because you gotta
Yeah, the
Oh.
you gotta get it ready. It's like the barber, right?
Oh, there you
Tilt
go.
your head.
And the priest stands on the east side, facing the west.
Right, so he's over here, facing towards the west, and you'll notice we're orientating ourselves towards the temple, towards the Holy of Holies. I know we're used to facing the east, but if you're standing here, the Holy of Holies is to your west.
And the priest lays both his hands upon the bull and confesses. And thus he would say, "Please, Hashem, I have done wrong. I have transgressed. I have sinned before you, I and my house. Please, Hashem, forgive the wrongdoings, the transgressions, the sins which I have committed and transgressed and sinned before you, I and my house, as is written in the Torah of Moses your servant. For on this day shall atonement be made for you to cleanse you of all your sins. You shall be clean before the Lord."
And go ahead and read part 5.
And they answered after him, "Blessed be the name of his glorious kingdom forever and ever."
All right. So this is, in fact, the service that you will know if you come for Yom Kippur and stay the whole day, where we do the Avodah service, where we reenact in some ways, not with the actual slaughtering, the service and retell what the high priest would do. And that line where we be clean before Adonai is where he actually is saying in this passage God's actual name. This was the one time during the year where Hashem B'Farash, the actual explicit pronunciation of God's name was uttered, which is why the people are answering, "Blessed be the name of his glorious kingdom." Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. And they would also fall on their face in prostration. Got the picture?
And as I understand, because we have not been allowed to say that name unless we were in the
Mhm.
temple of the high priest over the course of the centuries, we don't actually know anymore how it was pronounced because we didn't hand it down for person to person. We couldn't say it.
There are some people who claim, most of them are either mistaken or looking for hits on YouTube.
Right.
But they're correct. The standard belief is that we do not have that pronunciation.
So they asked for the Kohen Gadol is like for the people that are acting the same way.
What do you mean?
Because
This one, right?
they asked here, correct?
Right.
That when he confessed and everything, it's not that they function very similar to the Azazel.
No.
The people that
This one is for himself and his household, right? He ends up with multiple sacrifices. In order for him to sacrifice and take care of the other ritual, he has to first himself be clear before God. So he does this sacrifice, and then he can do the sacrifice on behalf of the community. It's kind of like the old riddle of who shaves the barber, right? If there's that old riddle, right? That there's one barber in the town, and there's a law that only a barber can shave someone, and no man can shave himself. So who shaves the barber? Right? It's like if there's no one else who's a barber, and I can't shave myself. Then he has to leap out of his own transgression in order to now be able to offer atonement on behalf of the whole community. And so that's why he starts with himself first. It also goes to the old, the old adage of, fix yourself before you fix your neighbor.
Yeah. And the other thing, let's see, it's too self-important with all the beautiful, expensive clothes he's wearing. He reminds himself, I'm not that great.
Oh, absolutely, right. I mean, the basic underlying assumption of Yom Kippur is we have all made mistakes, and we have all made mistakes. But he himself has to move out of that problem before he can do it on behalf of the community. Good? Good. Now Mishnah 9 is where we're going to get into the beginning of the Azazel that you're mentioning.
He then went to the east of the temple court, to the north of the altar, the deputy high priest at his right, and the head of the priestly family ministering that week at his left.
Okay, so he comes over to here, right? East of the altar and north, east of the temple court and north of the altar. And so he's here, and he's got the deputy and the other guy who's the head of the family, whoever happens to have that rota for the Kohanim that week. And they're together. And
there were 2 goats, and an urn was there, and in it were 2 lots.
Right, and lots here, we're talking like lottery lots, right? We're going to see what's on each of them, but this is a randomization machine. Right? Before we had random number generators, we had a pot, and inside the pot were 2 lots. And he's going to have to pull out the lots to find which goat is going to have which job.
So Purim wasn't the first we heard of drawing lots.
No, not at all. No, it's mentioned in the Torah already.
They were of boxwood, and Ben Gamala made them of gold, and they would mention his name in praise.
Right. So it used to be that the lots were just made of wood, and they had the writing on them, as we're going to see. But then Ben Gamala was the high priest one time, and he upgraded them. He turned the lots, rather than being wood, into being little gold plates. Why not? Not bad? Not bad. By the way, if there's a little echo here of some of the issues that are mentioned in the Haftarah of Shabbat Shekalim from the Book of Kings, that's where they find that the priests are not spending the money that's coming into the temple for the roof repairs. They're spending it on trumpets and bowls. Yes, that's always been a little bit of a tension within the Kohanim of adornment, aggrandizement versus the practical. And there is definitely a role, as we began talking about, that having grandeur helps elevate the service. And there's also a definite danger that too much aggrandizement really diverts funds from where it needs to be. So there is a little bit of a tension that's always running throughout all of this. There's no perfect answer. It has to constantly be watched. All right, now we're on Mishnah 10, chapter 3.
Ben Katin.
I should point out, as long as we're talking about people who made improvements, we're now going to take a little digression and mention other guys who made improvements. So this is like, as long as you mention Gamala, let's also mention some other guys who made important donations.
So why it was so important to know who did the improvement? That was Ben Gamala. Like in all this Mishnah and everything, studying the law, who cares about
you give credit where credit
Who cares?
Who cares? But I like the
Who
idea.
cares?
Who cares?
No,
The Kohanim care.
but he did in the name of the institution,
Yes.
not because he paid from his pocket. So the institution said, let it improve. So everyone that did something, you need to write your name. Like
What happens is when
I
you
think
read
it's not
his
the
name
case.
that he's done it, other people say, if he would do that, I should do something too. Even when we see people's names for donations that we publicize here, I look and I say, oh my gosh, Michelle gave a donation, I'm going to do that also. It encourages other people if you're going to get recognition. So when you mention their names, the next thing, other people will be making
you're
beautiful things.
completely right, but not in a legal text. Not a legal text.
Well, because inspiring people to support and contribute is not part of Jewish law.
So do you see other
We're going to see a whole list in the next Mishnah.
Yes. Yeah.
So he's not the only name, but for people that made durable contributions that were of significance, of such significance that they were still remembered during the days of the Mishnah, the authors of the Mishnah felt it was important to record them.
with all the respect to them, but I disagree
So
with that position.
okay,
Total
so hold on.
respect to you,
Let's
I disagree with
hold
your
on.
position.
I say I disagree.
As
You don't need to.
as I say,
The recognition is very.
sometimes the counterfactual can help, right? So, well, what if? So let's imagine instead, what if the rabbis agreed with Natan and said, you know what, this is important, we should talk about what they did, but it doesn't really belong in the Mishnah, right? Well, we'll just share that amongst ourselves.
Right.
Would we still know that these things had happened? Right, the Mishnah has survived. The chit-chat over who did what from the days of the Mishnah has mostly been lost because, you know, it wasn't written down, it wasn't transmitted, it wasn't central. Would we then now, 2,000 years later, be able to have a discussion of is it appropriate to remember the name of who donated for the classroom, the sanctuary, the new JCC wing? We would no longer have an example that, you know what, even though giving without the need of recognition might be nice, having recognition for those who give is appropriate, which you agreed with. So we wouldn't have that example if the Mishnah had decided to not include the names and donations of some people at least.
My perspective is different. Say, for me, for studying the Mishnah Yoma, is so relevant for me to understand all the what is related to Yom Kippur, to know who did the name of the person that did the improvement. Really, that will help me to be a better Jew in Yom Kippur, that understand better the Hukim and Mishpatim related to the Yoma.
That's why you should read Rambam, right? In Mishnah Torah, he cuts to the chase, cuts out the digressions, cuts out all of the tangents, and just is all business all the time. Mostly. He has a few tangents here and there, but it's mostly business 99% of the time. That isn't the way the Mishnah was written, right? The way the Mishnah was written was with some tangents put in. That's why when we are studying Yom Kippur, we can suddenly start talking about other topics that relate to the temple. Just because as long as we're talking about the temple, let's also mention this. That was simply the way they organized their thoughts. It's not the way most modern people in Western culture organize our thoughts. We organize more like Rambam. We like one topic. We like to be organized, logical, and clear. But you've seen from all the different Mishnahs that we've studied, sometimes really important sentences don't come until 4 chapters in. That we would have loved to have had at the first chapter, because they're not teaching it to teach it to somebody who doesn't know anything. They're teaching it to remind themselves for what they already learned through the oral law as their footnotes. So
I have no problem with that, but I mean the name. That's it.
I just have a quick question. Is Ben Gamala same as Ben Gamaliel?
No.
Those are two
different.
different people. Okay.
All right, let's get some other donors.
Ben Katim made 12 spigots for the laver, where they had before been only 2.
This is the basin for washing that was set up in the temple precinct.
He also made a mechanism for the laver in order that its water should not become unfit by remaining overnight.
Right. So there is an idea that the water, any water left standing would become unfit. So he made a mechanism that continually circulated the water so that it wouldn't become ritually unfit for what was needed. So that way you don't need to draw new water constantly to keep.
Pictures of this. That's
Wouldn't that
so
be cool?
cool.
Yeah, no photography back then.
See how they figured out to continually circulate with no motors, no engines, no electricity. King Monbaz had all the handles of all the vessels used on Yom Kippurim made of gold. His mother Helena made a golden candelabrum over the opening of the Hechal. She also made a golden tablet on which the portion concerning the suspected adulteress was inscribed.
All right. So Munbaz was considered to be someone who came to Judaism. He lived in a kingdom way to the north of Israel, but he was greatly inspired by Judaism. And so there's numerous references to him. And here you see that he wasn't only inspired, he was also willing to open his pocket. And so he helped with the adornment, and so did his mother. Help with the adornment of the temple. The question of the suspected adulteress, this is what's known as the sota. There was a passage that had to be written out that was then erased in the water that she would then drink. What she made was a tablet that had the words that the scribe would then copy from. So it was like having the perfect copyboard to work off of. So that way they didn't have to use a whole Torah or something else or a piece of parchment that they'd have to keep recopying over and over again. This would be a good print, if you will, that could be used.
I find it interesting that of all the things that you could possibly give, she chose that. Isn't that interesting?
So it's a whole other line of discussion, which we've done a little bit of it when we were doing a little bit of Gemara. The idea of the Sota ritual was not meant to punish the woman. It was meant to reconcile husband and wife. That was the purpose of it. Whether or not everybody always used it that way, it comes down to human nature. But the actual purpose of the Torah ritual was to bring husband and wife back together after this jealous breach. So the idea that she would want to make that easier and more beautiful makes some sense.
And make sure that it was done right each time, rather
Correct.
than mistakes having to separate them.
God
Make sure
forbid.
it's
Yes.
right.
And go ahead and do 4 and 5.
For Nicanor, miracles happened to his doors, and they were all mentioned for praise.
Okay. So if you look down at the bottom in the commentary, because I know you're all going to want to know this,
Down the doors. Yes.
about the doors, what's the miracle? All right. What miracles happened to his doors? They say that when Nicanor had gone to bring the doors from Alexandria of Egypt, on his return, a storm arose in the sea to drown him. They took one of his doors and cast it into the sea, right, thinking that this would stop the boat from being sinking, yet the sea would not stop its rage. They wanted to cast the other into the sea. He rose and clung to it, saying, "Cast me in with it." Right. So this is a donor who loved his doors. And they were bringing them back from Egypt on a boat, and he's like, "If you're going to throw my beautiful doors over, you're going to throw me too." The sea immediately stopped raging. He was deeply grieved about the other door. When it arrived at the harbor of Akko, it broke through and came up from under the sides of the boats. Right. So the other door was joined. Right. And others say that in fact was swallowed and then spat up. So that's the story in the Talmud of what happened to Nicanor's doors. Nicanor's doors. That sounds good in English. All right. Did everyone grab a copy of chapter 4? We are now going to resume our ritual.
They really know how to give awards for the donors. Today we shut the sign in a building that after 50 years it disappeared. They had for more than 2,000 years.
Yes. You're coming around to maybe the rabbis respected learning, which is why they teach in the name of the person who taught, the Shem Omro, as they say. But they also respected the other actions of the people in the community. They may not have been all great scholars, but they would make great contributions. And remembering at least some of that, even in a legal book which isn't about that, I think is a very important statement of how important it is. Okay, back to the ritual. So we are on chapter 4, Mishnah 1.
Okay, go back to, the priest was with the urn.
Right, with the pot.
The priest shook the urn and brought up the 2 lots.
All right, now,
The gold piece.
they were gold eventually, right? Go ahead and read what was on them.
One was inscribed for the name blank.
Well, that's actually not a blank. That's a formatting error.
One was inscribed
For the name, meaning
and
for God.
and the other for Azazel.
You have something different?
I don't have that.
What do you have? Chapter 4, Mishnah 1?
But I have the chapter 3 and Mishnah 11.
Must be different editions. Let me take a quick look at what you've
I
got.
thought there's only one Mishnah.
Well, there are some different Girsayot. All right, I'll have to check and see. Maybe.
More.
All right, more on it. But we're on chapter 4:1. I'll double check and see. Maybe when I was putting together, maybe it didn't print that last page. I'll double check. But it's a list of more people who were honored for what they did. All right. So now we've got a pot. Right? He shakes it up. And why is he shaking it?
Well, he's going to draw one of them, but he should know which
To randomize it, right? I mean, anyone here ever play a game where you put the dice in a cup? Right? That's exactly what's happening here. What's that? It's thousands of years old. We still do it. And then you have people go, wait a minute. You give those dice a good shake, right? It's controlled throwing. Right? This was making sure it was random. And go ahead and continue.
The deputy high priest was at his right hand, the head of the ministry family at his left.
Right. So
Can I take
we're
that?
witnesses here, right? Because what comes out matters.
I'm sorry. One is for the name, and why is the other one for Azazel?
So Azazel was a region of the wilderness. And what's going to happen is one goat's going to be sacrificed, and the other goat is going to have the sins put upon it from the community, and then off. We'll get to what happens to that goat later
Question.
in more detail.
Sorry. Why are they trying to achieve randomness?
Give me a guess.
I'm guessing it has something to do with fairness, but I mean, is randomness, does that really, fairness really go together?
One dies.
What's that? Well, so one dies, but who decides which goat is for God and which goat is for the wilderness?
I mean, is
Who decides?
God, I guess?
Exactly.
All right.
Right. You have the randomness precisely in order to make sure that it is not a human decision. Because if it was a human decision, if I was choosing this goat is the one for God and this goat is for Azazel, then I might be inclined for some other biases to pick one over the other. And then that could mean that I am jeopardizing the whole ritual of Yom Kippur based on my own biases of which goat is better for which.
And you're raising yourself up. Start with like God.
Right. And so this is a way to make sure that we say, the Torah says that it's random. I'm going to make sure that it is random. And that way, no one can claim that I made the decision. It was luck, or it was God that picked which goat and which, and therefore God can't be unhappy with which goat he gets. It's just random. And we're going to continue to work on the randomness. We're not done with that yet.
Point 3, if the lot for the name came up in his right hand, the deputy high priest would say to him, "Sir, high priest, raise your right hand."
Right. And that way, everyone can see, right, which lot came up in which hand. Make sense?
Right.
Because he's going to be reaching in and pulling out. And the one that's for God gets lifted. And the one that's not for God is not getting lifted.
So if the lot for the name came up in his left hand, the head of the family would say, "Sir, high priest, raise your left hand."
Mm-hmm.
Then he placed them on the 2 goats and said, "A sin offering for the Lord." Rabbi Ishmael said he did not need to say a sin offering, but just for the Lord. And they answered after him, "Blessed be the name of his glorious kingdom forever and ever."
Right? So there's a small debate about exactly the wording, but basically what he is now that he has the 2 ones, he's got these 2 goats, and it's boom. This one is a sin offering for God, or this one is for God. And we don't need to say what this one is, right? Because it's logical. If this is A, that's B. I don't have to say that's B, because if I know what A is, I know what B is. And we're going to mark the goats in just a second so we don't get them confused. Because you know what? Goats all look alike. Well, these goats, remember, are supposed to be as identical as possible, so that there's no, again, prejudice over which goat is which.
Who brought the goats?
You know what? I don't remember specifically whose job it is to get the goats. I do know that the goats have to come from the same farm, the same field, the same mother. That they have to be as, yeah, they have to be as close to the same as is goatly possible. Well, I would say humanly, but
I wouldn't think it would be from the same. That's interesting.
Why not?
Yeah, I mean, it makes logical sense, but it was just something that I thought they would pick the right one, and the blemishes and whatever.
Again, the more you introduce the human element of which goat you think is right, the more you are likely prejudicing your decisions. We humans are bundles of biases. We really, even if we don't think about it, somebody might like blue goat, somebody might like the gray goat, somebody might like the goats with the big horn, some guy might like goats with the small. There's all sorts of things that can strongly influence us without thinking about it. Or even when we do think about it, it gets worse. So this is trying to remove it from our decision.
Is the goat that's for the Lord the one that's going to be slaughtered?
Yes.
Or the one that's going to be sent away?
The goat for the Lord is going to be slaughtered.
Okay,
Yes. Which we're going to get more about in part 2.
I'm surprised that the Kohanim don't try to have a little farm growing the goat and the paraduma and all of this in order to try to be all the process as perfect as possible.
So in terms of the goat, you have a question of where are we going to find the best goat, right? And it's not necessarily going to grow from your farm because different farms produce randomly depending upon the year and the season.
But then
And the
priests had no
para,
land anyway. They
right.
had no place to-
well, they often were in control of portions of land. They weren't allocated land by the
Right.
division under Joshua, but they did end up often in control of land.
Okay.
But para aduma is harder because you can have 2 red cows and their baby cow is not going to be perfectly red. So that you have to go wherever the cow is.
And in fact, if it's your own goat, you might be prejudiced one way or the other because it was your land, and so it would add an extra element.
Right.
Whereas this is more random.
Right. All right. Chapter 4, Mishnah 2.
He bound a thread of crimson wool on the head of the goat which was to be sent away, and he placed it at the gate where it was later to be sent away. And on the goat that was to be slaughtered, he placed a thread of crimson wool on its neck at the place of slaughtering.
So that means, it's a little blunt, right? You put the crimson wool on the head because the confession of the congregational sins is going to be on the head of that goat. And you put the red around the neck of the other goat because that's where the knife is going to be going, right? And this way, you got the head goat and you got the neck goat. And now we don't have to worry about getting them confused because you could imagine what chaos that would be. If you say, all right, this goat is going to be for God. That goat is going out to Azazel, the wilderness spot. Now.
Oh, yeah, which one?
Wait. Which one was which? Who swapped goats? So this is a way to prevent confusion.
Sure.
Make sense? Okay.
He came to his bull a second time, pressed his 2 hands upon it, and made confession. And thus he would say, please, Hashem, I have done wrong, I have transgressed, I have sinned before you, I and my house and the sons of Aaron, your holy people.
Notice the addition, right? The first time the confession was me and my household.
And that's why we have 3 in Yom Kippur.
Exactly right. And you notice that it's, it's the, it is the concentric circles, right? It's me, it's the Kohanim, it's the community, right? It's me, my family, which was considered like a single unit in the ancient world, right? The idea of the individual as being a totally autonomous unit, that's a very modern concept. Him and his family was considered like a bundle of one, and then him and the other Kohanim was considered a broader bundle, and then him and the whole community is considered the broadest bundle for the Yom Kippur service. Make sense? Okay.
Please, Hashem, forgive the wrongdoings, the transgressions, the sins which I have committed and transgressed and sinned before you, I and my house and the sons of Aaron, your holy people, as it is written in the Torah of Moses, your servant. For on this day shall atonement be made for you to cleanse you of all your sins. You shall be clean before the Lord. And they answered after him, blessed be the name of his glorious kingdom forever and ever.
Doing so far so good? All right, now we get the knife. Mishnah 3.
Okay, but we're leaving the goats on the side now.
The goats are on the side. Yes, the goats are on the side.
He killed the bull and received its blood in a bowl, and he gave it to the one who stirs it up on the 4th terrace within the sanctuary so that it should not congeal.
Okay, because they're going to need that blood to be sprinkled on the altar. And if the blood just turns into a big scabby mass, that doesn't sprinkle so well.
So he's going to keep stirring.
So it's one guy's job to keep the blood moving, right? That's what he's doing. I mean, you will have noticed if you've ever seen any medical show that when they, or if you've had your own blood drawn, they will put the blood into ice or something cool because otherwise your blood will congeal and then they can't do all the tests on it and everything else. And they didn't have ice back then. So they had to do the next best thing, which was keep it moving so it doesn't start lumpifying. Very practical.
And they didn't have aspirin to keep your blood flowing, though.
Not so much. And I don't think they would have approved of adding anything into the blood that was going to be used on the altar. So let me just crush in this other herb. Like, what are you doing? All right, part 2.
He took the coal pan and went up to the top of the altar and cleared the coals to both sides and took a panful of the inner glowing cinders. And he came down and placed the coal pan on the 4th terrace in the temple court. All
right, which is, as you can see, is the same place where the blood is waiting. Right, so The coal pan is actually something that may sound like trivial to us, but if you look at ancient mosaics, you look at ancient coins, it is one of the most common symbols of Jewish antiquity, because the coals are what are going to be used for the incense. This pan is going to have the hot coals on it, and he's going to put the incense on top of the hot coals, and it's going to turn into this cloud of smoke, of sweet smelling smoke. So this was a very important part of what he's doing. And you can see he's clearing away the top layer and getting the hot coals that are from the middle part of the burning center of the altar. Make sense? Okay. I know it's a little tricky to picture sometimes,
Yeah.
but we're there. I think we got at least a vague understanding. All right, flying along. Mishnah 4.
On other days, he would
Meaning non-Yom Kippur.
He would take out the cinders with a silver coal pan and empty it into one of gold. But this day, he took them out with a golden coal pan and he brought them into the Hechal.
Okay, so this day it's even better. That's the basic understanding of that one.
Even more special.
It also has a question of weight. That a gold pan was actually considered lighter than the silver pan because the walls were usually thinner. So there was less metal in it than there was in a silver. That weight issue is going to become even more important when we get to the next couple sections.
On other days, he would take them up, the cinders, with a coal pan containing 4 cobs and empty it into one containing 3 cobs. But this day, he took them out with one containing 3 cobs, and in it, he brought them in.
Okay, so this is, well, let's do the regular day thing, right? So he's got one that contains 4 and an empty one that will hold 3. And he pours the one that has 4 into the one that has 3. What's going to happen? There'll be overflow, right? There will be extra coals that are pouring out. That's the point. That way you're sure that the one that has 3 is an absolutely full measure, right? Think about if you have a glass that contains, a liter, and you've got a 2-liter bottle, and you dump the whole bottle into the glass of that holds 1 liter, you will be absolutely sure that glass is to the top. Whereas if you take a glass that holds 1 liter and you scoop it into a well and pull it up, are you really going to get to the top of that glass? Yeah, maybe if you hold it like right underneath and then pull it straight up. But if you just scoop it, which is, remember what they're doing with the pan, you're probably not going to get an absolute maximum capacity. And on a regular day, they went for maximum capacity. On Yom Kippur, since there's all this exertion and the whole fact that he hasn't slept all night, you can do it with 3, and you'll end up with a slightly lower capacity because it's really just a bonus that we want to have the extra capacity. It's not required. So they're cutting him a little slack, not quite as much in the hot coal department. Onward to part A.
Rabbi Yosef says, on other days, he would take them out with a coal pan containing 1 se'ah,
which is much, much larger,
and empty it into one containing 3 cobs. This day, he took them out with one containing 3 cobs, and in it, he brought them in.
Right. And by the way, Rabbi Yossi loses this argument. But he's saying even on regular days, they even had more bonus coal. But the upshot is still that he is taking slightly less weight in coal than he would normally do, of embers.
So on other days, the pan was heavy. Today, it was light. On other days, its handle was short. Today, it was long.
Right. The changes there of the length, from what I understand for other commentaries, is that I don't really have an example, but if you imagine like a shovel, right? If you try to dig a shovel with a short handle, it's a lot of work. If you have a longer handle, you can put your body into it. And the idea here was that he could carry it with the handle going like under his arm, and that way it wasn't so heavy. Whereas if he was only carrying with a short handle, all the weight was on his wrist.
Right.
So it's
You don't want to drop anything.
no, and again, it's very practical because he needs to be able to withstand the rigors of his duty this day.
And this is the day he hasn't slept, he hasn't eaten. Right. On other days, the pan was of yellowish gold, today of reddish gold. That's the words of Rabbi Menachem.
Right, and the idea here was that the reddish gold was considered more valuable. It was the nicer gold.
These days they're selling rings, gold rings to ladies with that reddish color on it, saying it's more valuable. I saw it in the jewelry store, I had to look twice.
Back then, it was a question of impurities. Nowadays, it's a question of marketing.
Yeah, that's how interesting that they're the same thing.
Really?
Yeah. Back then, it wasn't really yellow gold. It was yellowy green, which was the inferior level of gold. And more of the goldy red was considered to be pure. We don't have an exact picture, and we also don't have an exact understanding of the ancient colors. It's something that is very frustrating, is that colors are so culturally bound that the word that's being used here is not necessarily yellow like we think of yellow. It's more of a yellowy green.
So was it purposely made red to symbolize more pure, or was it just how it came out?
That was what was considered better gold. So for anything, yeah, not just for the Yom Kippur service.
Yeah, I mean, did they tint it red on purpose, or is that just how it came out?
That was how it came out when it was considered more pure, which again, we may think of reddish gold as something that looks like, blood red. They may have just had something that had a slight hue to it. That to us may have looked more like our natural gold, because we have better smelting than they did on average. It's really hard to guess without having been there.
On other days, he would offer half a mina in the morning and half a mina in the afternoon. Today, he adds also his 2 hands full.
So this was a special bonus for the offering that's being done here, for the incense offerings.
On other days, the incense was finely ground, but today it was the most finely ground possible.
The offering of the incense in the Kodesh HaKodashim, the Holy of Holies, was considered to be one of the highest points of the entire year, because this was the day of the year, the moment of the year when the Kohen Gadol was in the Holy of Holies. So, and the incense was all that went in with him. So that is why they're making such a big deal out of how the incense is being prepared. Good? Okay. Mishnah 5.
On other days, the priests would go up on the east side of the ramp and come down on the west side. But this day, the high priest goes up in the middle and comes down in the middle.
Okay. And on a busy day, having priests going up and priests coming down makes a lot of sense. On Yom Kippur, just get out of the way. Let the guy do it.
So everything is different in order to mark very clearly it's a different day. And
to make the service run more smoothly, right? So it's a combination of it's different and also a combination of please don't mess up. Right? We're going to get rid of everything else.
Of course, Rabbi Judah has a different opinion. He says the high priest always goes up in the middle and comes down in the middle.
Yeah, but he also loses.
Okay. Point 2, on other days, the high priest sanctified his hands and feet from the laver, but this day from a golden ladle. And Rabbi Judah says the high priest always sanctifies his hands and feet from a golden ladle.
Right? And again, he loses, but the idea is still the same, that there is an elevation, there is an additional glory that's being done at this point. All right. Mishnah 6, and then chapter 4 is done. Look at that, a whole chapter in one night.
On other days, there were 4 wood piles there, but on this day, 5. That's the words of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yossi said, on other days 3, but on this day 4. And Rabbi Judah says on other days 2, but on this day 3.
Right. So they're arguing over the different wood that was set up to take care of the different types of sacrifices that were done. In the interest of brevity, Rabbi Yossi is the one who wins in the Talmudic discussion when they are wrestling over which one of these rabbis is right. That there were 3 on a regular day, and there was an additional one for today. And this was the one that would be for the extra embers for the incense, to make sure that there was plenty of hot coals for that incense offering in the Holy of Holies.
How they know all these details? Because all the temple was destroyed like 200-300 years before then.
By the time the Mishnah was written, it was about 150 years before.
So how they know, like, oh yes, I think it's 2, 3, or all the detail, because it's only for story for the teachers of the teacher that they told them.
The word "only" in that sentence.
Okay.
Right.
Well, there's one holy temple, and there are different versions.
Right.
So one of the teachers is correct, and the others are wrong. Or one of the students was better than the others.
Yes. Right. So let me ask you this: Who won the Battle of Hastings in 1066?
The Battle of what?
Hastings. William the Conqueror, right? Which was the nice name for him, right? So William the Conqueror from Normandy won the Battle of Hastings, which changed British history. When How do we know that? Right? Was there any photos? What was there CNN? Right? What was did we have?
That was written down.
It was written down, right? We have a prejudice in our Western thinking that something that has been written is somehow more reliable than something that has been transmitted orally. Both types of documents are published at different times. And in fact, one written book stuck in a shelf is less reliable than a oral tradition that is shared among hundreds and hundreds of people, because those hundreds of people become checks upon each other. And you can make more copies than you can of books, at least all the way up until Gutenberg made the printing press. So it's not only told teacher to student, teacher to student. It was told by teachers to students. And yes, there may be some disagreement about certain particulars, but notice that the only thing they're arguing about is between 1 and 2 amounts of wood. The vast majority of what they're discussing, there is unanimity on it. Whereas among different history books, try to find 2 books that agree completely on the Battle of Hastings. You will not find as much agreement. And that's because the Battle of Hastings was not transmitted as a universal cultural tradition among all the people of England in French or English. And we have to rely then on the pieces we have of written manuscripts rather than the wealth of knowledge that comes from an oral tradition. So oral tradition often gets a bad rap in the Western world. But as an overall tradition of a culture, as a means of transmitting the traditions of a culture, it is more reliable than having just 1 or 2 copies that no one else has access to. So.
But we think of it as a game of telephone, which changes as it goes along.
Yeah, I often heard people use that analogy.
Yeah.
And if I were to tell you, we're going to play a game of telephone, and if it comes around correct, all of you will get to live.
Oh.
And if it comes around wrong, you'll die. Do you think you'd be able to do it? And if you did the game of telephone, where after you whispered in his ear, he could whisper back to make sure he got it right, and you could correct him if he got it wrong, and then the same thing repeated each one, do you think we'd get around to the other side correctly? If the stakes were high enough and you were able to give correction.
The stakes that high?
In their own feeling, yes. The Jewish people live or die depending upon the transmission of our wisdom. Right? If you stop transmitting, or if you transmit it completely wrong, we stop. So the stakes were that high, as far as we considered ourselves as being a living community that needed to go on to the next generation, and the wisdom needed to go with us. And the whole point was we had a corrective mechanism, right? If I teach you guys and then I hear you repeating it wrong, I can say, oh, no. Or if you think you don't understand something, you can come to me and say, Rabbi Neely, I got a little confused, and I can try to clarify it in a different way. That is how this actually was transmitted. It wasn't just, I sat in class once, the rabbi told me this, and now I have to go teach someone else. It isn't the old, what do they say, see one, do one, teach one for medical procedures. This is a rigorous process of making sure that the knowledge is ready for the next generation of transmission. And there may have been a few small disagreements that crept in, and there are whole long discussions about why those disagreements happened and everything that entails. But the vast majority of the information was transmitted reliably and dependably. And that's why we're still here, and why we're still able to go on. And why, as you can see from studying this, you can't just learn it from a book, right? You got to have commentary at least, and it's best to have it with a living discussion, because even the commentary, one person might misunderstand what the commentator meant, but a whole group of people have a much better chance of saying, Frank, I'm not sure if you got that right. I think it might mean ba, 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 ba. And now we are self-correcting ourselves to stay on the path.
One of the first missions that I was here that you taught us, that was the basics of it.
Mm-hmm.
You just don't study Torah on your own. You don't study Mishnah on your own. You need someone that you can talk to and be reliable,
right,
and understand that.
Right. If you want to know more about that whole transmission process as it is understood in a very modern sense, but written 1,000 years ago, more than 1,000 years ago, the Iggeret of Rav Shirira HaGaon, one of the Gaonim from the Babylonian period, not actually Babylon like, Nebuchadnezzar, but the later Babylonian Persian community, unpacks the whole transmission process and also unpacks why we do have some disagreements, despite having such a good transmission process. And it's really an excellent document. It's not very long, and you can find good English translations. So you don't have to worry about learning the Aramaic and Hebrew. Okay.
What is the name of the document in English?
Just a second. Well, I've never